And welcome to another special episode of the Bakari Sellers Podcast. I hope you all tuned in where we listen to Gary Chambers and Shermichael Singleton kind of explain to us what the fuck happened. Today we have one of my political kind of heroes, I guess. I don't think I've ever told him that, but somebody who I look
No,
to. I mean, he's wrong a lot, but
it's
still,
it's already worth showing up just for that.
you know the voice, but none other than David Axelrod. First, how are you doing? What part of the world are you in? Are you
I
looking
am
for?
I am in Scottsdale, Arizona, finally reconnected with my wife who's been out here for a month. And so I am a happy camper right now.
There you go. Are you more excited about the Cubs next season or the Bears finishing out this season?
Well, I'm excited about the Bears finishing the season. I think that will be good because we got to start over. We need a new coach. We've got a great quarterback. I'm hoping they don't kill him. Because he's running for his life every week. But I'm, what being a Cubs fan is always about being an optimist. So I'm looking forward to next season. But I love baseball, so hence I'm out here in Arizona getting ready, preparing, training.
Well, let's jump right into it. You know, one of the things that I've deduced is that when two-thirds to 75% of the electorate feel as if they were better off 4 years ago than they are today, it's very hard to win that race, no matter who you
Yes,
are.
yes.
What happened from your perspective in this race? And talk about whether or not you believe my thesis to hold any water.
Oh, I totally subscribe to it. When I go out and talk and people ask me about what happened, I say I can give you three numbers and two letters that explain the whole thing. The numbers are 28. That was the number of people who thought the country was on the right track.
Hmm.
40, that was the president's approval rating, President Biden's approval rating. 66, which was the number of people who thought the economy was fair or poor. If you, Bakari, as a political professional, got these numbers, were handed a sheet of paper and said, these are the numbers the incumbent party faces going into a general election, you, being a student of history, would say, that party's not going to win. I don't care if the incumbent's running or not. And then you add two letters, VP. So you're running the number two person in the operation that everybody wants to fire. And listen, I think she far outperformed expectations, and it was a close race, partly because of that, also because Donald Trump was so deeply freighted with his own problems. But I'm not sure if Kamala Harris had run a flawless campaign, that in the end of the day, she would have won that election. I just am not sure about that.
Yeah, this is the closest race as the numbers get there. Donald Trump is below 50% of the popular vote. This is the closest race since Bush v. Gore, and there were 238,000 votes that separated them in the blue wall states, which is a very, very close race.
Yeah.
Before we get to the purpose of this episode, which is very, very much forward looking, I
Yeah.
want to answer a couple of questions that you have, I believe, strong feelings about. How much of the blame does Biden ultimately shoulder for what happened on November 5th? And I think the answer is no, but would a primary have made a difference?
Um, the answer to your first question is, and I think quite a bit of blame because, there are some of us who are out there a long time ago, a year and a half ago, uh, urging him to think about uh, cashing in his chips and passing the torch. And as I said then, my concerns were less political and more actuarial. I just thought it was unreasonable to say I'm only going to ask people to let me be president until I'm closer to 90 than 80. I mean, it was implausible. And having sat next to a president of the United States for several years in the White House, I had some feel for what that job is like and how unbelievably pressureful it is and difficult, even for people 30 years younger. So the fact that he didn't do it, and the reason I spoke out when I did was I was hoping there would be a campaign, a primary campaign. Um, Look, Kamala Harris may have won that primary campaign, and she may have been stronger for having gone through a primary campaign, having to introduce herself to the American people in a serious way in 100 days was a difficult task. But it's also true that someone may have run and won who was not part of Washington at all, a governor or someone from completely outside of politics who was more able to critique both parties and that person may have had a chance, but ultimately history suggests that the incumbent party, whoever runs, is going to bear the burden for how people feel about the direction of the country and the incumbent president. And none of those numbers were at a level that it was going to be easy for Democrats to win.
Yeah, I think one of the things you're referring to is of the G7 countries, we saw those who were in power post COVID or emerging from
Yeah,
COVID. All seven lost votes,
yeah, yeah.
lost second most votes, but not all of them lost power, but all of them went backwards when it comes
Yeah,
to
it's the,
electoral.
the verdict about incumbents globally since the pandemic has been brutal, and a lot of it has to do with the cost of living, with inflation. And now Biden, I think, exacerbated his problems by insisting that the economy was better than people felt,
And he
and that's
also there was a meeting apparently with Gettner. Was it Gettner? But it was a meeting with about 30 or so economists back in January of 21, and he referred to inflation as transitory,
yeah,
which apparently was a bit of a head in the sand moment.
yeah. I mean, the word he that eluded him was cumulative. The fact is, inflation may come down, but prices don't, and they were 20% higher than they were a few years ago, and people felt it. And Bakari, I've said you maybe with you on the air, I said throughout the campaign, if I believe deeply in democracy, I think democracy is about to be stress tested in a big way. But if you're talking about democracy over the dinner table, it's probably because you don't have to worry about paying for about the cost of the food on your dinner table. So, you know, um, history will, I hope, be kind to Joe Biden on the things that he was able to accomplish, some of which were of historic importance. History will not be kind with about his role in this campaign, and there's just no way around it.
Let's go forward looking. And do Democrats have a message problem or a messenger problem? And let me just also say this. I am not someone who believes in a race this close that you throw the baby out with the bathwater. And I think Democrats have a lot to be proud of because you had in a very weird historic type of run, you had Ruben Gallego, Rosen, Baldwin, all win. You had
Slotkin.
Slotkin was the one that eluded me. You had the entire slate in North Carolina win, all the way down to shout out to Allison Riggs, who is going back to the North Carolina State Supreme Court after winning by 200 some odd votes. So I'm not someone who throws it out, but talk to me about diagnosing the problem with the Democratic Party after losing all seven battleground states and what some people see as having to completely reinvent itself.
Listen, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't overemphasize that, but I wouldn't underestimate. What I worry about, Bakari, is I think Democrats are going to be lined up to do very well in midterm elections because I think Donald Trump is already, even with Matt Gaetz withdrawing, is indulging himself in a big way. I think that there's going to be a feeding frenzy among, you know, well-connected interests and, uh, his billionaire advisors. And I think that he is, when you look at his appointments, um, the question really is, people didn't really nominate when he says he's got a mandate. He didn't have a mandate to sort of usher in the bar scene from Star Wars as his cabinet. He had a mandate to make people safer and to make people more prosperous by bringing costs down. He's going to be judged by both. If he tries to do the things that he's talking about, uh, tariffs, mass deportation, 7 trillion more in tax cuts that add immeasure, will add tremendously to an already large federal debt. All these things are going to they're going to drive costs up. And in terms of safety, I don't know. I mean, Gates is gone, but Tulsi Gabbard and some of the other folks he's appointed. We don't know who he's going to appoint for Attorney General. They're talking about Kash Patel as FBI director, Bobby Kennedy Jr. running the health programs. None of this crap makes me feel like we're going to be safer. So I think Republicans will be vulnerable in 2006, maybe in 2028 when Trump is not on the top of the ballot. But we should not take that as an excuse not to do some soul searching about the Democratic Party, because I've said this many, many times. The problem with the Democratic Party is that it's become too much of a kind of cosmopolitan, college educated uh, party based in the suburbs, and we still fashion ourselves as the party of working families and working people, and we promote goals, economic goals that are aimed to help them, but we approach them like missionaries. We go to them like anthropologists. We say, we're here to help you become more like us. And the message there is, you folks who work with your hands, work with your backs, who don't have a college degree, you are less than us. What you do is less important than I'm doing sitting in front of a computer moving money around or whatever it is. And, we treat these people, Bakari, like essential workers in a pandemic because they actually make the country go. And while we were sitting at home in comfort, making a living on our computers, they were out there making things, growing things, delivering things, running essential small businesses, caring for people. They were doing the work that is essential to our lives. But then the pandemic ends and they become invisible again. And so I think that we have some soul searching to do about how we approach people and whether we listen or lecture. About the second thing I think we need to do is, and you know this better than I because you were of where you grew up and where you live. There are assumptions that white liberals make about how black people think, about how the Hispanic communities, they don't even think about the fact that there are communities.
They lump them all together and call them
Right,
Latinx, which
right.
drives me crazy.
Latinx to me, when I first heard it, sounded like a laxative.
Yeah.
Okay. No Latina, the people who are, they're not calling themselves Latinx. That was something
No.
invented on a college campus somewhere. And they're not, these communities, when you talk about second, third, fourth generation Hispanic Americans, they're just like second, third, and fourth generation Americans of all sorts, and they're the working class Hispanic voter thinks like a working class voter, and they're motivated by economic issues. Many of them are quite conservative socially. So the idea that, every person of every Hispanic, every black person in this country is, progressive in the on social issues, and every one of them thinks alike is the presumption that white liberals make in their glittering office towers and apartment buildings in the cities or homes in the suburbs. And it's got to stop. We got to listen to people. We got to respect people. We've got to understand that we're all in this together, and everything that everyone does to contribute to America's progress is important and should be valued. And I think
Mm.
we've lost some of that.
I would wholeheartedly agree. One of the other things that we've been losing traditionally, just because we've ignored it, I've ignored it. I try to ignore it and focus on the issues that really matter. But I've found that these things move cycles in very weird ways, or these culture wars. I despise them. Donald Trump is professional at them. How do we respond to the trans ad? And
Yeah.
what's your advice to Democrats? Would you, first of all, I mean, let's not, I don't want to use the political animal, who's probably the greatest one we've seen since before I was born, and Barack Obama, but let's say you're running X candidate and that ad comes up. The Harris campaign made a conscious decision not to respond to it, although it moved voters from one direction
It
to
did.
another by close to 3 points. You see Nancy Mace tweeting about it 260 times in one day,
Yeah.
taking it from a question of fairness in sports, which is a question that we have to answer, to one of where I find it to be discriminatory policy. How do we answer it? Because I'm somebody who,
Yeah.
my response to you, if is one day if I ever run for office again, I'm gonna sit here and say, David, look, I don't think I don't think children should be able to make these decisions by themselves. I think parents should be the ones who have the final say so, because a child stays in a child's place. When it comes to sports, I think that we have to get to a point where we make sure that there's fairness all around. Now, who makes those decisions? I don't have that answer. I don't know how but this conversation is more nuanced than yes or no. And Republicans have climate changed us. We ask Republicans all the time, do you believe in climate change? Yes or no? And they
Yes.
ask right now, do you think a biological man or somebody who's transgender should play sports? Yes or no? And
Yes.
they're really nuanced type of answer. So
Well,
talk to me.
you use a word that's important. It's conversation. I
Yeah,
mean, we need to. I think the responsible public fish official and the responsible and the successful public candidate uh, needs to listen and try and understand what the other person is saying. It was interesting when those trans ads hit. I had a conversation with someone, a group of people, and someone said, "Well, no one cares about that issue." And another person said, "You're missing the point of the ad. The ad was not about whether you cared that much about the issue. It was that Kamala Harris seemed to care about that issue. And that was what the point of the ad was, that this was a priority for her, uh, you know, uh, uh, making those transition surgeries available to all prisoners in prison." And that, you know, seemed sort of out of the mainstream to people. And as much progress as she made in rooting herself in the middle class with her early advertising, that ad was meant to throw her back into the mode of San Francisco liberal. And it was successful in doing that. And yeah, I think we should we should be we should not want to demonize people for who they are. And I was moved. A friend of mine said to me, approached me in tears and said, "Listen, I never discussed this with you, but I have a trans child, and uh, you know this has been very brutal for them." And he's, I think this is someone who's transitioning to being a woman. But, and the guy said, "Okay, they used it, they won an election with it. Now will they just leave my kid alone? Can he
yeah,
just live his life?" And so, we need to, this thing was weaponized, and it was weaponized effectively. And Democrats made themselves vulnerable for the reasons that you said, by being absolutists and not acknowledging the nuances of the issue. You mentioned climate change. Listen, you have to be honestly completely oblivious not to recognize that climate change is getting worse by the year, that the cost of it in terms of human life and property damage
right.
is
Insurance,
enormous. I
insurance
mean,
costs, insurance costs. Look at Florida.
yes, so absolutely, it is a crisis. It is an existential issue, but I try and keep in mind that if you are someone who's made a good middle class living extracting energy from the ground, and
Right,
that's probably how your parents made a good middle class living too, you don't necessarily want people to come and tell you it's your obligation to give up your job and that good income to save the planet. Now, I think we do have to make this transition, but at least understand that for that person, it's an existential crisis.
right.
If that's an existential crisis, it's an economic crisis that's very much close to home. So, how do you have that discussion in a way that's respectful and responsive, but still act on our responsibility to the planet and to our kids and grandkids? And uh, so I just think we need a lot more nuance and a lot more ability to listen and a lot more respect. I mean, how many emails, how many texts did you get, Bakari, from people saying at the day after the election, well, we just have to acknowledge we live in a racist, misogynist country of ignorant people. Well, look, there is racism and there is misogyny, and there's no doubt about that. But if that's what you conclude this election was all about, then the Democratic Party is doomed because that underscores the sort of uh, uh, the sort of attitudinal issue that we've been talking about from the top here. We need to be smarter and more sensitive and more responsive than that.
Shout out to the ER doc in Atlanta, Georgia, who's doing work with his hands every day, and not the same type of work we were talking about, but
Right.
he's dealing with people every single day. He reached out to me about this trans issue and highlighted the discrimination and the violence that the community is undertaking and how
Hmm.
Democrats have to continue to fight and find some balance, which leads me to my next question, Ax. I
Yeah.
think Democrats are learning the wrong lesson. And I'm seeing people who normally Chris Coons is probably the last vestige of Blue Dog Democrat. I think you probably would agree with
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
So, I
Yeah.
expect
Great guy.
great guy. I love Chris Coons. I remember when he was, by the way, Delaware only has 3 counties, which is weird. But I remember when he was county exec of the largest county in Delaware before he became a United States senator. And he's somebody who should have been Secretary of State or going through that nomination
Yeah.
process right now. But others are now coddling Trump when I believe that one of the lessons that we should have learned is that Americans want a fighter. What's the posture we should take with Donald Trump? I see people saying, oh, well, I'm not going to fight this person or this initiative or that initiative because Americans chose him. They didn't choose us. And they are taking a backseat to a lot of those things. I'm not saying we need to chase every hair on fire moment from Donald Trump because you're going to have a heart attack. There are a lot of those things out there. But I think that we are losing a posture of fighting Donald Trump and now wanting to kind of nestle in close to him because people think that there was an outward rejection of liberalism. What posture should we take?
Yeah. Well, I don't think that. I don't think that. I think we should fight Donald Trump when Donald Trump should be fought. I mean,
Thank you for
uh,
that profound
no, no,
statement.
no, no, no. But I mean, the point is that like everything, every, I will be the first to say if Donald Trump makes people more prosperous, if Donald Trump makes people healthier, if Donald Trump makes people safer, if Donald Trump, there are a lot of things that he could do that you'd have to say, okay, if he does that, more power to him. Now, as I said at the beginning, he's not getting off to a very good start. I don't think his ideas will lead us there. And we ought to oppose those ideas that, and those nominations. I mean, I'm scared to death about Bobby Kennedy running the health
Listen,
programs.
I just saw somebody get diagnosed with a new mutation of the bird flu. It was a child. And the last person I want governing our response is Bobby Kennedy.
Horrifying, horrifying. So we ought to fight like hell on that nomination and his dismantling of health services in this country and of research. He says he's going to fire 600 people from the NIH the day he gets there. The National Institutes of Health that do research. Uh, you know, so we ought to fight where the fight should be. But we also ought to, we ought to fight on the grounds of the America that we are fighting for. And there's every time he does something that it's going to make people. I mean, when they talk about, for example, uh, cutting Medicaid and food assistance, food stamps, in order to help finance the tax cuts, or if they're talking about cutting the Affordable Care Act to help finance tax cuts, that's a fight I want to run into.
Yeah.
That's a fight I want to run into because it's about values. I mean, who are you actually fighting for? And
But let me ask you this question, David. Are we in and this is a question that I highlighted. I'm about to let you get out of here too, because I could talk to you probably for the full how long this would be. But are, are we post policy now? I mean, I hear you on that fight. I
No,
want to.
well, we are if we allow it, but policy is a surrogate for values. Policy is a surrogate for values. Who are you fighting for? And remember, people, I think they just gave us a big lesson in this. People vote their experience. Okay. I mean, yes, they were riled up about, and let me say parenthetically, it shouldn't have taken 3 years for the Biden administration to react to what was going on the border. That was a mistake. Uh, but uh, but on the economics, people were reacting to what they were feeling in their own lives. If he's doing stuff that's going to impact on their lives negatively, their own lives, how about their economic well-being, their safety, the prospects for their kids. I don't think we're post policy on those. If he guts the Affordable Care Act, even if he can't repeal it, and people are can't get insurance or paying higher rates or being abused by insurance companies because they've eased off on what insurance companies need to do. I think we ought to fight like hell on that, and I think people will hear us on that. Let's just get back to basics and let's fight because I don't believe at the end of the day, honestly, I don't believe that Donald Trump gives a damn about people. I think Donald Trump gives a damn about Donald Trump, and he's going to pursue policies that will help himself and those close to him. And often it will be at the expense of the rest of us. We ought to call him out on that. We ought to fight on that. But do I think that am I willing to say everything that Donald Trump does is something that we should oppose simply because Donald Trump is doing, or every nominee? I don't, I don't, I would vote for Marco Rubio. I don't particularly agree with
I
him.
mean, I've said that many times over,
Yeah,
particularly with the choices that are there now. Gates, who's gone now,
right.
Hesketh, who doesn't deserve this or is not
Yeah,
qualified,
Tulsi
Tulsi
Gabbard,
Gabbard, and RFK.
Hegseth, I think, is another, a guy who's never run a popsicle stand is now going to run, a $3 million uh, bureaucracy that is there. And,
Billion,
and
billion,
I,
three
a
billion,
million, a bill, no, million,
million people.
3 million people, yes.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah, it's obviously a huge part of the budget. But that and all this should be to say one other thing. We should not be the defenders of bureaucracy. I served in Washington. I know that bureaucracy there's inertia that fights progress, that fights change that is necessary. We should always want to be challenging the bureaucracy to do better. We should also think about ways that we can promote change and progress that doesn't necessarily involve the government or involve bureaucracy. So let's not cede that. Let's not become the candidate of bureaucracy, but let's not also allow the party of putting knuckleheads in charge of government prevail on that. So I guess that I don't know if that sums up my philosophy, but that's what I meant by let's fight where we should fight, and let's not bother fighting on things that we shouldn't fight on.
Last question for you, kind of sort of. I'm gonna tie it into one. I believe that the biggest thing that Democrats have to get refocused on right now is New Jersey and Virginia.
Yeah, you're right, brother. Those are going to be the first indicators of what's to come. And there are a couple of people running in these. There are people running in these races who would represent real progress and change. First of all, Virginia can elect a Democratic governor. Number one. Number two, I mean, I don't know where you are on the race, so we may be in separate places. I don't know. I mean, I'm a very big fan of Abigail
Oh, I
Spanberger.
like Abigail. I mean, I know that Bobby Scott, I believe, is talking about running against her in a primary for no other reason that I've been told. And I know Bobby Scott very well, other than they don't want to hand it to her, which I'm not sure is a good reason to run. But I believe that she'd be great. And I believe LeVar Stoney as lieutenant governor there would be great. And Jay Jones as attorney general. You'll have a litany of people running
So
between that.
she, yeah, and so when she will become one of the national leaders in our party and a face of the Democratic Party. Mikey Sherrill just announced for governor of New
It's about
Jersey.
30 of them running up there, though, in New Jersey.
Yeah, no, I
Rob,
understand.
the mayor of Newark, great guy. Mikey
Yeah,
Sherrill, he's been on the show, great
yeah,
person.
yeah. I mean, so we're going to see new faces. Listen, one message here is, Barack Obama was the first senator to be elected president since 1920. Generally, leadership has come from the states and not from Washington. I think that the next leader of the Democratic Party is going to come from the states. The next leaders of the Democratic Party are going to come from the states. And we've got a lot of talent percolating up there and a lot of talent that's there right now. And I'm actually assuming that we can protect the institutions of our democracy against co-optation. Uh,
I'm a lawyer and I make up words all the time. I'm not sure co-optation is a word. Actually.
yeah, it may be. I was thinking about it when I said co-op. Well, co-opting,
Co-opting is a present
co-opting.
participle.
Yes, thank
Co-optation.
you, thank you, my friend, thank you,
And
thank you. Co-opting, and worse, and we have to be zealous and vigilant about that. You lawyers are going to have to play a role in that, but assuming that we have free and fair elections in 2006 and 2008, I'm really excited about it because I think we have an opportunity to redefine the Democratic Party without sacrificing fundamental principles, but with reconnecting with some values and principles that we've lost, and we can do very, very well.
my last question for you is: you said new faces. I'm not foreclosed to the idea of Martin O'Malley or Rahm Emanuel, but I'm also a little skeptical of the leadership going into a new tomorrow. You sell me on. And by the
Well,
way,
I threw
I
Rahm.
actually like Martin a lot. Rahm is an acquired taste, I would say.
He is, and I mean, I think everybody would acknowledge that. I mean, I've known him since he was 21, so I've had a long time to acquire him as a taste. But this is what I know about him. He is brilliant, and he is relentless, and he is a winner. And, in 2006, he was entrusted with winning the House back. They thought it was going to be a two-term project. He managed to do it in one. And yeah, everything he's been involved in, he's been a winner. And he knows politics. He knows fundraising. He knows obviously the whole realm of policy and television and all of that stuff, and he would be a real strong voice of resistance to
Can he speak to
Trump.
those abilities of talking to workers who work with their hand? That's my largest concern. I mean,
Yeah.
you mentioned where we have to go at the
Well,
outset.
I
Just
look at the people. Look
keep that
at go
moment.
go. The people who have talked to me who are most enthusiastic about it are people from those states, because they've a lot of them know him and have worked with him. They're former members of Congress or members of Congress, and when Rahm took back the House, he did it by recruiting people who were able to run and win in those districts that Democrats had lost. I think he can. Look, I don't even know if he wants to do it, to be honest with you. There are other options that are open to him. I know he's going to stay in the public fight, but what we shouldn't this should not what we shouldn't do. The question we should ask ourselves is, what do we need to move forward? What do we need to mold the party in a way that will be successful? Both, by the way, there's a shit ton of stuff that needs to be done in terms of evaluating where the Republicans beat Democrats in terms of motivating first-time voters and uh, technology and their use of digital and their use of podcasts, and so all of that needs to be part of what's studied. And there are great technicians out there, by the way, Bakari, among the state chairs. Ben
Oh yeah,
Wickler up in Wisconsin and others.
I
Uh,
like actually. He of the ones who were running, he's like one of my favorites. I
yeah,
actually
I love Ben. Yeah, I mean,
he's like a better executor and executive director than actually a
well,
chair.
we've had a model before where you have a general chairman and like an executive chairman, and one of them is basically sort of chairman of the board, and the other is the CEO that runs the operations day to day, and that may be a good model. But I like Martin O'Malley. I'm not, Martin is a charismatic, thoughtful guy.
People raise
But
money too. I mean, I don't,
yeah, no, I'm not, I'm not, I'm completely open, but I think what we shouldn't do is give it to a sinecure for some retiring politician.
no.
We shouldn't have a sort of how many identity boxes can we check, in one fell swoop, we have to be mindful of the fact that we are a diverse country. We need to be a diverse party, but the first qualification for this job or for jobs, if they split the job, should be
Winning.
winning, winning. And so that's sort of my attitude. Rahm Emanuel's a winner. I threw his name out there, but mainly to start a conversation, and it surely did that. So yeah.
Well, David Axelrod, I appreciate you joining the Bakari Sellers Podcast. It's always great. Make sure you guys tune into the Axe Files, which is one of, if not the best podcast out there. I enjoy it. I don't mind coming in number 2 and number 3.
Don't forget Hacks on Tap. I think you've been on
Oh,
there as
I
well.
actually have been on Hacks on Tap, but thank you
Yes.
so much. Shout out to Scottsdale, Arizona, the Chicago Cubs, the Bulls,
Yes.
who and the
Struggling. Yeah.
Chicago Bears.
Mired in that netherworld of being bad enough so that they can't win, and not bad enough to get the first draft pick.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining the show.
All
Stay
right,
tuned.
brother.
Yes,
Great to be with you. Nice to
Thanks,
see you.
brother. And welcome to another episode of the Bakari Sellers Podcast. Today, actually, we're having one of our specials where we're trying to figure out where Dems go from here. You've heard from my good friend David Axelrod, but now you actually get a chance to hear from somebody who's a practitioner who actually has some success and who's just done amazing work as chair of her state party, but none other than Anderson Clayton. How you doing today?
I'm good. Thanks for having us on here.
No, you deserve it. I mean, in light of everything that happened on November 5th, how are you feeling about the victories that you had in the great state of North Carolina?
I mean, I think the North Carolina Democrats kept it really local this year. And a lot of the credit that I think that we're getting, people are attributing to Mark Robinson. And I'm like, no, actually, it was because Democrats had really good candidates that spoke to a message that people in the state could identify with. And I think that we should all feel pretty proud of that. Democrats won 6 out of the 15 statewide races in North Carolina, even though we were unsuccessful at the presidential level. And we broke a Republican supermajority by keeping an R+2 district with Representative Lindsey Prather out in Buncombe County. And so I think that, there's a lot to learn from what happened in individual districts, and also how we can move the needle and regain ground in places where we know that we're hurting right now, like Eastern North Carolina still. And unfortunately, that meant that we were unsuccessful in a presidential win, which I know is, if people are like me right now, that has really hurt them over the last couple of weeks too, thinking about what happens next. But we don't give up the fight. And I think that's important.
Why did you decide to be a state party chair? I mean, that is the most thankless job in the entire fucking world.
I was joking about it with Chair Harrison the other day. I said, the party is always the punching bag, actually, is sort of where I have come to it and come to see it as in so many ways. And I get that, we should be able to be heavily critical of ourselves, especially after a time period like that. But I think that a lot of people should be wondering, why are we giving up on it now when we obviously need to dig in and build it up more in so many ways? And I think that that's where I look to state parties, because they were the infrastructure. And I think that I found a county party because when I was working in the Iowa caucuses for the vice president, originally trying to get her elected as president, county parties were the backbone of what really built up the Iowa infrastructure. And I learned a lot about relational organizing, the way that you come into communities. And if you don't have a strong county party and a strong infrastructure in a county, the Democratic Party really doesn't exist there in so many ways, at least not year round like it should.
So a couple of questions. The first is, what should we be looking for in the next DNC chair? And then I want to dig into some of the things you did in North Carolina.
I think that we should be looking for somebody that's willing to pay state party chairs. A lot of people think that these jobs already come with a financial salary to them, and they do not. And it means a lot of young people, a lot of working people, a lot of folks that we should see in positions of power in this party are not able to get there simply because they don't have the ability to work two jobs. And I tried that for the first half of my term as chair, and I was really lucky because my state executive committee voted to pay me for the remainder of it. And that changed my life in terms of health insurance and everything else. And it made me be able to do this job better. And I think that that is something that I look to as a guaranteed promise of taking seriously the people that are doing the work on the ground for us. And then also looking at state parties as right now, the DNC's annual budget only provides 7% of the state or two state parties in terms of their yearly allocations. And I want to see that at 25%. I could be met at 15%, but I think that a DNC chair needs to think seriously about a plan as well for at least every state in the country. And where can we take that ground? Because Republicans did that a long time ago. They created the 30 to 40 year plan for their party. And we need to seriously take time to sit down and do that. And I know that takes away from other things, but I think it makes a lot of sense right now with where we are to help chart the trajectory of the party going forward.
What happened to Kamala Harris in North Carolina? I mean, you see, she actually went places that weren't just, Charlotte, Raleigh, Durham. She went to some other places along the eastern portion of the state and went during the hurricane to travel and see, and Joe Biden did as well. But what was the difference between her race and Josh Stein other than just the local issues? Was there anything she could have done differently?
The nationalization of politics. And I think that honestly, that is what's hurt our party a lot in the last 10 years because we have focused on just winning the presidential level. And I think that North Carolina Democrats focused a lot on the down ballot to the point where people at one point in time looked at me and they said, every time you go on MSNBC, all you can talk about is your down ballot candidates. And I'm like, yeah, because my job is not to take my bully pulpit and uplift the person that has the largest one right now. My job is to take it and uplift the people that don't have one at all. And especially in North Carolina, where we had 15 statewide races, so many of those folks did not have the money and the resources to get themselves on television or to promote it. And I honestly think that the campaign should have dug in more to that. Like, people like Jessica Holmes, our state auditor, would have been the first Black woman to sit on our Council of State this year had we elected her to. And I think that, the campaign taking surrogates a little bit more seriously, especially in places like the South. And that's not to critique what, our state campaign did, because I think that they came in at a time where a lot of this was political backlash at the global level. Like, I think a lot of people are looking at a very micro perspective here. And I'm like, look at the macro. Look at what happened across the world right now. Like, everybody swung to the right. And we are in a post-pandemic economy that made people feel like they're not benefiting from it right now. And that is real. And I think that honestly, at one point in time, we adopted the messaging of Republicans of like, yeah, prices are terrible. And I'm like, well, we're the people that are in charge right now. And, I think that it's like political 101 that you don't necessarily take the opponent's messaging and use it for your own. And I think that some of this was us just getting a little caught up in what was going on. And we could have been more seriously about how we listened to the ground and what was really happening amongst voters in real time.
What do you make of the criticism that Democrats have abandoned working class voters?
I mean, I think right now every voter might look at us like we abandoned them. We lost this election, and we've got to take a serious look at how we go back into communities and listen to folks. Like, I mean, our party is planning listening sessions for January. I know that sounds like a trivial thing, but it's like, no, I mean, genuinely people in our communities right now and in our party are hurting. Like, Black voters in Eastern North Carolina did not turn out like they have historically in previous election cycles. And I'm like, me and Congressman Don Davis got to get into Eastern North Carolina and make sure that we are rebuilding county party infrastructure there, because a lot of what we saw, Western North Carolina went to the right or went to the left a lot better than Eastern North Carolina did. And we were seeing just like the amount of county party infrastructure that Western North Carolina had. It was strong and it was able to withstand even Hurricane Helene coming through and having massive devastation done to that region, but they still had a GOTV operation. Eastern North Carolina did not have that. And that is something where our party looks at like, you can only do so much in 2 years. And I'm like, our future looks through rebuilding over the next 4 and 6, because I'm like, if we can hold a Supreme Court seat again in 26 with Justice Nina Earls, and we can take 3 seats in 28, I mean, we're going to have the majority on a bench and be able to give back power to those places. Gerrymandering too, I should say this, the South is truly the biggest form of voter suppression right now is gerrymandering in our region. And I think that is also something that did not help this campaign in any region that they were in.
I mean, you're preaching to the choir. I talk about gerrymandering all the time. It's not a sexy issue, and it's hard to sometimes explain it. but is the reason that our democracy is so fragile, or one of the many reasons. The other reason, though, is misinformation or disinformation. How do candidates and parties combat that? I know you saw a lot of it on the ground. What should we look for our county and state parties to do more of when it comes to that? Or does that come from the top?
No, I think that that's the other point that I would say of like, what's the difference between Kamala Harris and Josh Stein? It's like the fact that Trump's disinformation machine was running for the last 3 years, 4 years of their presidency and vice presidency. And so I think that it is making sure that we are pushing information about what Democrats and what's happening into communities year round. And that also, that doesn't just come from county party infrastructure, but it comes from digital ads. It comes from utilizing places that we are not in right now. And a lot of where people get their news is cultivated, right? And so the Discord chats, the WhatsApps, the Instagram group messages, like we saw information go underground this year. And I think that that should be the biggest problem that our party tries to identify. And we're not all going to be good at every single platform, right? And so we need to know where the lanes of different folks are taking right now, people in our ecosystem are doing, and making sure that we're not trying to just duplicate efforts, but that we're getting the experts in the fields to be able to take media seriously in the upcoming elections that we have. And how we're doing that at the local level, at least, is making sure that the state party is trying to educate people in those counties about how their legislators are voting on state and local issues. We need to have a more concerted effort this year at making sure that, like, we don't just have to talk about what happened when it's happening. Like, we can say the fact that public schools have been defunded in your county by your legislator year round, right? Even if it happened in 2023, it's still a problem in 24 for us and going into 25. And that's something where I think the information and keeping it consistent in people's minds, because folks have short memories right now too.
Yep. Has Rahm Emanuel or Martin O'Malley or Ben Winkler reached out to you?
I like all of the above, plus a Ken Martin and a Mallory McMorrow, and I think a lot of people that are just thinking about what their next options are and what they can do differently in this upcoming election.
And let's look at it. I mean, you had a certain level of success. Do you think that can be duplicated? Well, and you had a certain level of success, and you suffered from something that I believe the country suffered from, but particularly in the South, which is that the couch won this election. So going forward, what are some of the concrete steps we can make, both within the party and some of the things you're going to do individually in North Carolina?
We're going to keep our organizing team on the ground. And that's something that is not cheap, as you well know, but it is a part of this party now that we think is the key to doing this full time. We started a year-round organizing program called Project 100 in 23. It's what helped us win municipal elections. We're targeting municipal races this upcoming year. We're taking this party more local than it's been in a long time. And I think that the way that we do that is identifying places like Rocky Mount and Greenville in North Carolina that still have Republican mayors, even in majority minority cities. It's targeting places like Louisville and Forsyth County, because we have populations there that should have Democratic representation right now, but don't. And I think that we're suffering at the local level too from just lack of constituency services and helping people maintain that. Our party could really, like, people looked at me this year and they said voting is transactional. And I'm like, yeah, we should take that seriously, because I think it is. It's about who's helped me today, yesterday, and the day before that. And I'm like, our party has so much to offer people in terms of that, because we are a party of public servants. Like, we want to do right by communities. We want to build them. We want to sustain them. And I think it's putting that energy back. And so part of what our party is going to do in December is led up by our second vice chair, Dr. Hardy. She's going to do a 7 days of service type thing. And we are going to really just take it and try to get the volunteers that we've had in all of our different areas to do something related to giving back to their communities. And I'm like, that's just something where Democrats, like, we've got to reinvest in our roots more. And I feel like we have gotten too up here in the national landscape to think about, like, what's going on in my own backyard right now. Could I tell you who's on my city council and what they're doing right now?
Mm. I'm about 3 hours down the road from you here in South Carolina. And South Carolina is an interesting place culturally, as is North Carolina. I mean, you guys are known for having the second best barbecue behind us. But
We could argue that.
how should
And
Democrats...
Texas also might for some reason now too.
Barbecue is terrible. That dry thing is called brisket. I'm like, what is this? What are y'all doing? You just
At
cut
least
up
we
the
can
cow.
agree that the Carolina barbecue is better than
We
whatever
can
Texas
agree.
has to offer.
Whatever that thing is they're talking about is barbecue. I mean, anyway,
Love to our Longhorns and everything.
they have meat on a platter. Let's talk about cultural issues. And one of the things we saw was that trans ad. I've spoken to David Axelrod about it, Michael Singleton about it. I've spoken to a lot of individuals about it, but I haven't spoken to someone who's been able to navigate it with some level of success like you all did in North Carolina. Um, how do we navigate social issues, especially in states that tend to be less future forward on these issues like North Carolina or South Carolina?
What you heard Democrats in North Carolina talk a lot about, at least from every, and I'll be honest with you, I went to every event with them. I did all the stump speeches. I could recite them back to you in my head, what our candidates statewide went around the state and did, and their ads as well. A lot of it focused on protecting personal freedoms, making sure that there was an economy that worked for everyone in the state of North Carolina. And that was driven by public schools. And the fact is that public schools are still the number one economic driver in our communities everywhere. And the thing that I tell people today is I'm like, man, think about if we tried to introduce public schools into this country right now and saying that we were going to create a resource that was free for everyone. It was going to be paid for by your tax dollars. They would be calling us socialists in that way. And I'm like, but you're not going to sit there and take away people's public schools, especially when you're looking at states like Kentucky that also beat referendums to fund private school vouchers more. Why I think, broke a Republican majority in a state legislature is that people realize like their communities are being defunded by your state legislatures right now. And a lot of our priority and focus has got to be down to the ground, because I'm like, those are the folks that are making the biggest decisions that's impacting people's lives. Folks just don't know that right now. Like our entire sort of media apparatus this year focused on the national level. And that is why I think that me as a state party chair going on national programs and talking about the down ballots was such a rarity for people. And I don't know why. Like I remember a commenter made a point one time. She was like, man, I don't know anybody that can name all their down ballots like that. And I was like, well, maybe you shouldn't be a state party chair, in my opinion. Like I'm like, that should be something that everybody should be able to do, is talk about the folks that are running in these races, especially if they're running statewide, and especially if you're a statewide candidate too. And I just think that's
I mean, that's so important. I mean, building that party from ground up. We saw where New York and California, maybe a couple other liberal left-leaning states are losing electoral votes. Those places are going to Texas and Florida,
I
which
shouldn't
means
be so
that
excited about that, but
by 2030, the blue wall will not be enough. We'll have one more race where the blue wall is enough to be president of the United States. Now you're going to have to win North Carolina. So tell me this, what are some of the things, concrete steps we can take to ensure that you break the supermajority they have in North Carolina? And what are some of the things that we can do to invest in North Carolina going forward to make sure that it is firmly purple but tilting blue?
So right now we're going through a recount in North Carolina for our Supreme Court justice race, because
Allison Riggs
holds Jefferson Griffin by 722 votes. He is challenging every single voter that he possibly can right now. And so we're taking them to court, and we expect to be there for a long time, to be honest with y'all, making sure that we are fighting this out. And so anybody can support us with resources and with their time and their energy by going to ncdp.org and signing up to volunteer, because that is our first and foremost fight right now that we are still in from this last election. And the fact is that Republicans are still trying to gerrymander and to steal voters in North Carolina in these egregious ways. And so our Supreme Court race is one of those. And if we can hold this Supreme Court seat, we're going to take back our Supreme Court by 2028, which means then we are going to reverse partisan and racial gerrymandering being legalized in North Carolina at our Supreme Court level, which is going to give the pen back to our state legislature, and hopefully actually an independent redistricting committee that the Supreme Court would do again to help us get fair and equal maps in North Carolina. And so we are playing the 26, 28, and 2030 game, because we expect to hopefully get another seat in that reapportionment in 2030. And I tell people the road back to Congress runs right through my state right now. We are the only state in the country that's got two Republican United States Senate seats that could flip from red to blue this year or in the next 4 years. And then you've also got, if we take back our courts in 28, the opportunity to give 3 House of Representative seats back to the federal level as well for the Democrats, because gerrymandering took us from a 7-7 split to a 10-4 split for the congressional reps that we have currently. And right now we sit in a really interesting place in the minority right now in the House of Representatives. So North Carolina matters a lot, whether or not people think
North Carolina is the future of democracy. Literally 2032, North Carolina is a must win for Democrats if they want to either get reelected or win a race, hopefully, over whomever the Republicans put up. 2 questions of great import before I let you go. why is Trisha Cotham so horrible, and how do we beat her?
Mhm. Well, she drew a district for herself this year, so it was a little bit hard, but we did put up a strong fight. Nicole Sidman was a great candidate who we knocked thousands and thousands of doors in her district, and they had people out there every single weekend, but it was gerrymandering, to say the least, and to say the lot is that we're going to make sure that we're still running against her this year very hard and ensuring that voters know that she, sold them out and is a traitor in terms of abortion rights in North Carolina.
Yeah. How can people follow you on Instagram? How can people get to the North Carolina Instagram, social media, and how can people donate to the North Carolina Democratic Party to make sure that they see the work that you're doing?
You can follow NC Dem Party on Twitter, or on, I guess, X now, but I'm still calling her Twitter. Elon does not own me in that way. And then Threads and anywhere else that you can find us. And then also you can donate to the North Carolina Dems by going to ncdp.org. And I am Abreeze Clayton on Twitter and on everywhere else too. So yeah.
I appreciate you. You're so dope, and you are the future. You're not even, that's crazy. You're not the future.
I can still be the future.
You're the right now.
You're
the right now. You're the what we need right now.
That means I'm getting older, it means I might not be the youngest state party chair for long.
You're not the future. You're the right now. Thank you so much for joining the Bakari Sellers Podcast and helping